Thanks, Chip. I hear the silent, I see the silent applause. As Chip said, we do have to be careful. As dietary supplements under something called the Dietary Supplement and Health Education Act, we can make no claim as the diagnosis, treatment, or prevention of any symptom or disease. So what we can do is make what they call structure function claims. We can improve or support a healthy body or body part or function of a body or body part. So when we talk about the Daily Detox Plus, the claims we basically make are we can remove heavy metals and other toxins from the body. We can support a healthy immune system, and we can help support healthy pH levels in the body. These are the three basic claims we make. It just so happens that when you do that, the body gets much, much healthier. And a cleaner, healthier body has the ability to fix itself. In most cases, and in many, many, many cases, we get sick because the body is not able to fix itself because of the presence of toxins, volatile organic compounds, heavy metals, and other things. It is true. We are exposed to toxins on a daily basis. A lot of us believe that that's just the price we pay for living in an industrialized society. We love our cars. We love our cell phones. We love sometimes a really poor diet. And we love all these great conveniences, and the price we pay is that we're exposed to all these toxins. And while that's true, and we accept that, you shouldn't accept the fact that we have to live with that. We have to have these toxins build up in our body over time. And so when I first started working on this, as Chip said, it was in the mid 90s. I realized that all these toxins existed out there, but no one's really talking about them. And I believe the reason they weren't talking about them is because they said, why should we dwell on something that we can't control, that we can't do anything about? And some of the work I did lead to, for example, the National Institutes for Health used to have a site called Toxtown, which talked about all this stuff, and that's come down in recent years. I'm hoping that goes back up. But we started talking about finally the toxins around them and what they do to us. And then me and my partner, Dr. Stuart Lonke, a pulmonologist in Los Angeles, wrote the book Invisible Killers in 2007, where we enumerated all this stuff. What are the toxins in the environment? Where do they come from? How do they get into our bodies through food, water, air? Once they're in our bodies, what do they do to us? How do they increase our risk for disease and dysfunction? And then the most important thing is, how can we avoid toxic exposure, mitigate the risk of toxic exposure, and actively detoxify? And that's what we kind of tackled. And there's lots and lots of ways that you can detoxify, but we found that the best way for systemic detoxification is the use of natural zeolites. And like what Chip said, though, is when I first came across this concept of the use of natural zeolites, I realized there were problems with the products that were out there. Even the naturally mined stuff that was that everybody was using, that whole societies were using as part of their daily diets. I realized that the zeolite in nature was just too big. And even when they mine it and they micronize it in the mine site, they use something called chalcination. They crush it using ball mills and things like that. It's still giant particles, anywhere from 5 microns to 200 microns, like a rough granular sand. So I said, if we're going to get this stuff into our bodies, we need to micronize it. We need it truly at a micron or submicron level. And so that's my first step. I used to use a very high efficiency centrifugation and ball mill, but I've gotten better and better and better at this. And so now our smallest particles are 0.47 microns. Our average particle size is less than 1 micron. That means that when you ingest it, it actually gets absorbed in the bloodstream, gets all over your body, and helps pull toxins out from all over your body. No one else is doing what I'm doing. So they use my marketing material, so they call it micronization, but they really don't know what they're doing, and they're not micronizing it. And then the next thing was, I found there were commercial zeolite products on the market as late as mid 70s. There was a product called Zetox in 1973, and the FDA pulled it off the market because they found it had a lot of mercury in it. And I thought that was funny because that's what zeolites do. When a zeolite is in a mine site and water flows through and air blows over it, it's sucking these toxins out of the environment. It's nature's filter, But when it does that, the zeolite in the mine site is full of all sorts of toxins. Now, I'm not saying that's dangerous because, like I said, natural zeolites have been used for 800 years in traditional medicine. But imagine that it's already so full how many toxins can it take out of the body? I mean, if you've got a sponge that's full of dirt already, how much more dirt can the sponge absorb? And so I came up with this whole concept of activate. How do I clean the zeolite in such a way that I can make it the most active it can be? So I came up with a project using natural acids and heat to increase something called cationic exchange, to force all these toxins out of the zeolite and clean it up. And it's very labor intensive process. It takes several days. But you know what? We get it clean. And so what's left is this micronized, cleaned up, activated zeolite that has the ability to pull tons and tons of toxins out of the body per drop. And so there's nothing like it in the marketplace. I launched the first product in 2004. We've sold millions and millions and millions of units of that. But over the years, I've just gotten better and better and better at making this. And so we're making the best product we've ever made right now. And the only place you can get it is Navan Global, and that's the Daily Detox Plus. I will say this, there are lots and lots of knockoffs. I was the first one to launch a colloidal suspension of a zeolite, a dropper bottle of zeolite. No one else had that. I was the market creator for that. And since then, there's been no less than three, maybe 30, 40 knockoff products that have come to market. Nothing's even close to the Daily Detox Plus. I will say this, they all use my marketing information. They use my published studies. They use all the stuff I created for my products, but they're not even close to what we provided with the Daily Detox Plus. So that's the basic overview. Robin, I don't know if you want me to go over anything else or just jump into questions and answers.
We do have a lot of questions. Can we just see how many we covered today? And if we don't, we'll get them the next time. Interesting. You said that. I think they're also using your testimonies.
Testimonials, yeah.
Your testimonies from your product on other places too. Okay, so Chip, I didn't want to cut you off. Did you have something you wanted to start with first, or you want me to get in and you just come alongside?
No, I think just go right into it.
Okay, I'm going to go from the people that sent them first, and we'll try to cover them all. We have had a couple of great testimonies on the esophagus, Rik, issues where people actually had one gal who could only do liquid food for a full year. She lost a lot of weight. They did everything they could doctor-wise for her. Her mom found the drops, put her on the drops, and she will not go without these drops. I'm telling you, it's changed her life. She said, she got on the drops. It took her a little while, but right away she started getting some relief. And then, over the months now, I think she's been on them for about 5 months, and she had her first apple the other day, and she was ecstatic, absolutely ecstatic. And so the question would be, maybe a lot of these questions we've had some testimonies on, and they're wanting the science, like, why do you think that helps the esophagus, or, just from your viewpoint?
It really depends on what esophagus issue there is. Okay, so the one that jumps out first is gastroesophageal reflux disease, which is GERD, which when I was a kid, we called heartburn, and that's basically a weakening of the sphincter that allows acid to go from the stomach up into the esophagus, can burn the esophagus. And over time, that burning can yield to something called Barrett's esophageal, which puts you at high risk for esophageal cancer. And so you got to worry about that. Most of the time, that's treated simply with proton pump inhibitors like Prevacid and Prilosec. The problem with those long term is that you're lowering the acid your stomach produces, and so you need acid to digest your food. So you wind up with lower value from your food because you're not properly digesting your food. So if anyone is on those proton pump inhibitors, I usually recommend that they take plant enzymes, things like that, to eat smaller meals throughout the day to get more value from their food. The other thing to consider is that there are lots of things that weaken that sphincter. For example, caffeine. So if you drink a lot of caffeine, it weakens that sphincter and greatly increases the risk for acid reflux. And then also, gravity is your friend when it comes to acid reflux. You'll find out that when you lay down, it's much worse than when you stand up because gravity helps keep it down. And so if you are prone to that, first of all, don't eat late because you're going to lay down and have these issues. And when you do lay down, try to prop your head up, try to prop up at an angle. That'll help a lot too. So how does the zeolite work, or how does the zeolite help in that? I did talk about balancing pH levels, which helps a lot. The zeolite naturally balances pH because the zeolite itself, even though it's slightly acidic in solution, it does love positively charged compounds. And for those of you who don't understand pH, think of water, perfect water, H2O, as having a pH of 7, perfectly neutral. That water is actually 2 hydrogens and oxygen. 1 hydrogen can come off of that. That hydrogen is a positively charged compound, H+, and the OH is OH negative or hydroxyl group. If you have more protons, much more protons, H+, it's acidic and the pH goes down. If you have much more hydroxyls, OH negative, then the pH goes up and it's alkaline. That's the way to think of it. How much you have of H2O, how much is OH negative, and how much is H+. And it just so happens that the body loves to be alkaline. The body loves to be slightly alkaline. Physiologic pH is about 7.4, slightly alkaline. When you're slightly alkaline, everything works better. The enzymes fold correctly, your proteins fold correctly, bacteria doesn't grow well in alkaline environments, viruses don't grow well, cancer can't grow at all in an alkaline environment. Think about it this way. Your DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is an acid. And in your cells, the center of the cell is the nucleus. The center of the nucleus is nucleolus. That's where the DNA is. And the nucleolus is always acidic because it's got to support the production of DNA, acid, deoxyribonucleic acid. So for viruses to replicate, for cancer to replicate, it needs an acidic environment to make copies and copies and copies of the DNA. And so when you have an alkaline environment, it's really hard for it to do that. And cancer is always striving to create an acidic environment. So all that being said, most of us wind up with an acidic environment. And we do it because of poor diet, lack of exercise, all sorts of things, medications. I will say this, even medications are measured in clinical study at physiologic pH. And if you go to the hospital, a lot of people here, one of the first things that happens in the hospital is they'll give you an injection of bicarbonate. They'll say, give them 2 cc's of bicarb. That's basically baking soda that raises your pH to alkaline levels so that everything starts to work better. Your drugs start to work better. So what we've seen with the zeolite is the zeolite loves positively charged compounds, and protons are positively charged. So as it goes through the body, some of those protons are going to migrate in and out of the cage, the zeolite cage, and basically on a geographic basis is going to raise the pH, lower the acidity of those areas, and actually stabilize the acidity around the body and make for a more alkaline environment. The other thing is some toxins actually function as acids in the body. They're called Lewis acids and will have the effect of creating an acidic environment. And as those toxins are pulled up by the zeolite, you actually wind up with a more alkaline environment. And we've done acidity tests, we've done pH of the blood, the urine, and we've done muscle biopsy, looking for pH in the muscle as people use the zeolite over time. We found that systemically we're increasing pH or making the body more alkaline over time with the use of the zeolite. So that's one thing, but there's so many other issues with the esophagus. We talk about a condition called dysphagia, which is an inability to swallow, and many medications cause that. Stress causes that. Psychological conditions cause that. We can't properly swallow, so you're kicking everything up. And then even worse is achalasia. That's where the esophagus actually swells. The muscles of the esophagus spasm and tighten, and every time you swallow something, it comes right back up. And the principal cause of that is either side effects from medication or stress. People are stressed out and they tighten up, and it actually physically tightens up the esophagus. The main treatment for that is actually Botox. They inject Botox to the muscles around the esophagus, and that relaxes them, it paralyzes the muscle, and you can swallow. Or there's surgical alternatives where they actually cut the muscles around the esophagus. So there's lots of stuff they do if you can't basically handle it by getting off those meds or by reducing stress in your life. Robin, I'm sure that was a much more complicated answer than you wanted.
You really pretty much approached so many of the questions that are coming up. So you're going to be referring back to what you've already said a lot. But I do want to say that last, what you were talking about was her problem. And she actually had the esophagus stretched a couple times. Does that make sense? Am I saying?
Yeah, what they'll do is they'll put it, it's almost like angioplasty. They put it and they do an endoscopy and they try to stretch it out so that there's more space. But if she truly has achalasia, it's just going to tighten up again. Yeah. And so I hate to say it, but in many, many cases, it's psychological. And she just needs to get help and talk about her problems and try to relax, maybe meditation, things like that, because it could just be that she's thinking too much about it and it's stressing her out and she's not able to swallow because of those issues.
Well, I think some of the science you just gave us is probably has been her answer, because she no longer has that issue. As long as she's taking
Fabulous.
a
Yeah.
lot of zeolite, she has no issue. She eats anything she wants now. It's been a miracle for her. So, and she's
Great.
had this problem since she was 10 years old, and she's in her early 50s. So
Wow.
pretty
Okay.
amazing. Yeah. Okay. I wanted to just from that question, I'm gonna skip this other one that was on for Frank, but I'll come back to it. With what we were talking about, just kind of moving in, because this is kind of the same science you gave us, but we wanted you to know that we have a couple of autistic children, actually an adult and some children coming. We've got a lot of new people on, Rik, by the way. It's just really exciting. And we're going to be getting this recording out. But we have an adult autistic, Claudia, that will be giving testimony soon. She was spitting, and she's nonverbal. She's just started on the zeolite, and she now has stopped spitting. Now, I know there's probably could be a lot of issues and problems for that, but I didn't know if you want to go into a little bit on the autistic and maybe address this also, and drooling and spitting, how zeolite could possibly help.
Well, drooling and spitting are two different things. Spitting is usually a sign of Tourette's, not just autism. It's a Tourette syndrome is whenever you think of something, you just do it. You're missing that filter that says, I'm going to think about something and not enact it. So you find a lot of Tourette syndrome patients, they curse, and they have a tic because they're trying not to. They're trying to pull back that curse, pull back that thought. And even spitting is they think about spitting and they just do it. So they just lack that little that nuclei in the brain that says, I'm thinking about it, but I'm not going to do it. How many times have we thought about something and we stopped ourselves? Tourette syndrome patients can't do that. So let's talk about autism, because there's been all this kind of misinformation and theories about what the underlying causes of autism are. And for many, many years, a lot of people say it was vaccines. And I would say, certainly vaccines have saved more people, have helped more people, certainly, than it's hurt. But it is true that for many, many years, one of the major preservatives in vaccines has been thimerosal, which is mercury containing. And I got to tell you, I think it's a bad idea in any way, shape, or form to inject mercury into a human body. Mercury is only toxic. There's no beneficial need for mercury in any possible way. Topically, it's been used as an antibacterial because it is deadly. It does kill bacteria just like it kills everything else. But certainly you don't want to inject mercury. And so more recently, they've been using other preservatives than thimerosal, and you always have had a choice. I mean, for many, many years to have mercury-free vaccines. And that's what I did for my children. I had 3 kids. I made sure every one of them had their vaccines, but they were mercury-free versions of the vaccines that I made sure we ordered mercury-free version. So that being said, there was a lot of theories, and there still are a lot of theories, that the rise in autism coincides with the rise of vaccinations and more mercury. But there's also a lot of other sources of heavy metals in the world that kids were being exposed to. And they have proven time and time and time again that when these kids are chelated, when heavy metals are specifically removed from these children, they do better and have better outcomes. So we know in some way, shape, or form, heavy metals have something to do with the etiology of autism. Okay, so if we can do anything to get these heavy metals out of these kids, or even adult autistic people, they're going to improve. Now, why? People have to realize that there are good metals and bad metals. A lot of people think metals shouldn't be in the body. But good metals, there's calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, sodium, potassium. These are good metals that we need for life. We can't exist without them. And then even on a micro scale, there's micronutrients like boron, manganese, copper. And we need copper to live. We can't make energy in our body without copper. You become hypocupremic and you can't do anything in the body if you don't have a little bit of copper. So there are metals that are absolutely necessary for life. And then there's bad metals: mercury, lead, cadmium, arsenic, tin, bismuth, aluminum, antimony. These are metals that can cause all sorts of damage, primarily because they displace the good metals and stop the functioning of coenzymes and proteins that rely on those metals. Okay, so why do some people become autistic and some people don't? Well, it all comes to excretion. Some of us are good excretors of metals and some are poor excretors of metals. Some of us naturally can kind of bind up and transform those metals and get rid of them. And people that can't, the body sequesters those metals, hides it in mostly metabolically inert or inactive tissue like bone and muscle and fat. Different metals tend to go to different areas. Mercury, for example, loves to go into fat, especially the fatty sheaths around the nerves. So mercury causes all sorts of nerve damage. Lead loves to go in a bone. It displaces calcium and goes into the bone. So a lot of problems with lead poisoning over time is loss of bone density because the lead has now displaced the calcium. So what we're finding, at least we believe with these autistic kids, is that these metalloproteins and metalloenzymes are completely inhibited because of the heavy metals. So we need to get those heavy metals out. We did a small study, a 63 patient study with the University of Arizona back in 2009 with Dr. Adams at University of Arizona. And in that case, we did measure a huge increase in excretion rates of heavy metals in the kids. And across the board, the kids did phenotypically better. They did better on all sorts of tests and 9-hole peg tests and paper tests, paper pencil tests. They actually did better over time with cognitive function. Again, we're not saying we're treating disease or curing disease, but getting metals out of the body is a good idea. And there's a direct correlation between heavy metal exposure, heavy metal body burden, and autism.
Awesome. And I know our family thanks you and forever will for my 2 autistic nephews who are just doing beautifully after years on your product. Thank you. We also have a question from Frank on a friend who has severe lower intestinal attacks that almost make her pass out. And so he was just wondering if, it's kind of hard to know without diagnosis, I know for you, but if you want to just respond to that real quick of how zeolite could possibly help.
Okay, so if these are basically, like you said, attacks where they come and they go, especially if they come and then you have some sort of outcome, you go to the bathroom, you pass gas, things like that, there's usually some underlying cause. It's usually dietary related. For example, people are lactose intolerant, might not even know they're lactose intolerant, and they eat stuff all the time, and they haven't correlated the fact that they're lactose intolerant. They had just had an ice cream sundae, and 2 hours later, they can't believe how much pain they're in. They're in so much pain, they're cramped up over the toilet, and they pass out. They literally pass out from it. And it does happen quite a lot. So try to understand what you're eating, what you're doing, especially if you have these sort of intermittent problems. I always recommend keeping a journal, because in many, many cases, you can find out that certain foods, certain activities are causing your problems, and it's easy enough to avoid those foods or activities. It's like the old joke, doc, it hurts when I do this. So the answer is don't do that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there are a lot of different intestinal problems. Crohn's disease, for example, gluten sensitivity. In fact, I know a guy in Kentucky, and he had already had several resections where they removed parts of his colon, and they never even checked him to see if he was gluten sensitive. And he was a true celiac sprue, a little less than 6% of the US population, cannot digest gluten at all. And so for people that don't know, you hear this magic word gluten all over the time. You're supposed to be gluten-free. So what is gluten? So gluten is a family of proteins called gliadin proteins. And gliadin proteins are sticky proteins that are found in things like oat and barley and wheat. And it's the sticky part of bread. Like when you're kneading dough and making bread, the way it sticks together is because of gliadin, because of those proteins. And a certain portion of the population are missing enzymes to break down those proteins. And so what happens when these sticky proteins get in the digestive tract is they stick. They're sticky. So they stick to the walls of the digestive tract. They prevent the digestive tract, the intestinal tract, from undergoing peristalsis, which is the muscular contraction in the digestive tract that helps move food along. And so imagine that your body's trying to contract and move this food along, and it can't because the stuff is sticking there. So that's painful. And what can happen over time is those muscles can actually die and become necrotic. And when that happens, you actually have to have surgery. You have to remove that dead tissue. And all of that because you can't properly digest bread. You can't properly digest gluten. And like I said, a little less than 6% of the US population is in some way, shape, or form gluten sensitive, have what they call celiac sprue or gluten sensitive enteropathy. So get a test. It's a simple test. And if it's true, avoid gluten. basically get gluten out of your diet. Because it could be that she is gluten sensitive and she feels that pain because of that. But then there's Crohn's disease, which is autoimmune. There's ulcerative colitis. There's all sorts of different things that can happen. In those cases, certainly detox is great. Removing toxins, heavy metals helps the body do all sorts of things. But on those specific occasions, you've got to avoid those foods, avoid those activities. And also, there's lots of things you can take to clean out the digestive tract. For those of you that have known me for a long time, I'm a huge fan of fiber. We just don't eat enough fiber in our diet. The average American only eats about 10 to 11 grams a day. You need about 20 to 30 grams a day of fiber. And there's lots of like fiber supplements and things you can take, both soluble and insoluble fiber, that will clean out your digestive tract, help get better value from the food you eat, help balance your pH, help balance your blood sugar. So I've already begged Navan to take a fiber product. So let's see if I can get Navan to launch a fiber product. It's something every man, woman, and child will benefit from.
Awesome. We just had a testimony come on. I don't know if you see that, but on the chat, I live with Crohn's disease. I swear our detox is making life so much better. No episodes in a year, no medications, only daily detox. Thank you, Rick. You are a blessing. Just wanted you to see.
So Crohn's is a little different because Crohn's is autoimmune. It's your immune system attacks the receptors on the surface of your intestinal tract, and it can damage those receptors and prevent food from properly being absorbed, from nutrients being absorbed, and cause all sorts of problems along the way. So the fact that the Daily Detox Plus, the zeolite, is naturally immunomodulatory. It modulates the immune response. Most autoimmune diseases are going to benefit from this, and that includes Crohn's disease, but also includes multiple sclerosis, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, myasthenia gravis, type 1 diabetes. Anyone that has an autoimmune disease, you're going to have less hyperimmune responses if you're using the zeolite because of its immunomodulatory properties.
Awesome. And for Colette's question, you sent that the interview that you had about the study out to some of us.
Yeah.
We will get that out to everyone that I have on my list. I will get that out. And if you will please pass it on to your teams, we'll make sure everybody gets that. So Colette, we will definitely get that. I had a question.
Well, Robin, let me just say, so what that is I did a phone call at the end of the study with Dr. Adams and with some people that participated, and that phone call was transcribed. So you have that. We do have the raw data. For a variety of reasons, that study was never published. It was a good study. It should have been published, but I can't go into the politics of peer review. But for some reason, that was completely out of my control because it was a third-party study. It was never published. But I do have the raw data, and I do have that transcribed call.
Okay, thank you, Rick. We will get that out. I had a question that came up on chat, and I was going to talk about, because we have a lot of issues with liver at this point. We have people with fatty livers. And I had a question come up about, this is kind of adding these together. Will the Daily Detox, if I'm reading this correctly, she's wondering if the Daily Detox will take the good, iron out of your body. And I'm going to share a testimony real quick, Rick, because I want you to kind of refer to this too. We had a testimony a while back. It was amazing. And I'll never forget it. This woman had too much iron in her body. And it was so bad that she had, this is months and months of doctors, help and all of this. They actually had sent her home to die. She was in hospice, bedridden, when a friend gave her the information, and she got on your Liquid Zeolite product, and she took the crisis dose, 10 drops every hour. And within a few weeks, she was out of bed. And within a few months, she had no more issue. It balanced her body. So with that, I'm going to let you respond, because I know it's not going to take the good iron that she needs out of her body, but it did balance her body. Can you go ahead and answer those?
Yeah, the problem is, my wife once asked me, she goes, "Can't you answer yes or no to any question?" I said, "No, I can't. Let me tell you why." So I'm going to give you a much broader answer than you probably want. Zeolites have been used for hundreds of years. For the last 100 years or so, it's been used in animal feed. And it was principally used in animal feed to prevent aflatoxicosis, which is fungal poisoning that is found in animal feed. So it helps, and it prevents liver damage. The aflatoxin poisoning can cause liver damage in pigs and chicken and cows and sheep and all sorts of things. But the concern was, and it was a valid concern, we know the zeolite pulls out toxins and metals and things like that. Will it pull out good things? like calcium or magnesium or phosphorus, or things that are necessary for these animals. And a giant study was conducted in ruminants, goats, cows, and sheep. And what they did is they gave all the animals the same diet, but by the type of animal, and half the animals got the zeolite, half did not. And the upshot of the study was that invariably every animal that got the zeolite had higher nutritional status than the ones that didn't. So not only did the zeolite not remove the good stuff, it actually made the good stuff more available in their diets because it removed the bad stuff that was in competition. By removing the competition, it became what they call a nutritional enabler. It allowed them to get better value for the food they were eating. So that's something that's really kind of valuable when we're talking about this. So when you look at something like iron, iron is very low in the affinity scale of the zeolite. The zeolite doesn't really like iron. It likes small, highly charged metals, mercury, lead, cadmium, arsenic, tin. They tend to be, all the things that are bad for us tend to be smaller with a higher charge. And all things that are good for us tend to be bigger with a lower charge. It's just nature. It's God's creation, just the way things worked out. And the zeolite is really good at taking out the bad stuff and really doesn't like the good stuff. That being said, concentration can make a difference. So even though iron's really low in the scale, if there's a lot of it, the zeolite's going to pull out some, just because there's so much of it. And so what we found with people that have iron overloads, basically patients that have hemochromatosis or hematochromatosis, are that it's considered a liver condition because the body can't properly balance iron loads. That's usually treated with phlebotomy. They give blood every couple of months to try to get rid of excess iron in their body. But we found that many patients who have hemochromatosis, taking the zeolite, found that they could balance those iron levels, that excess iron was taken out. Now, on the flip side, if you have normal iron levels, it's not going to make you anemic. It's not going to take out iron when you have normal levels of iron and normal concentration of iron.
Okay, wonderful. And it won't, the Daily Detox Plus will not make someone anemic by taking out the iron that they need.
No. Now, if you are anemic, it probably will help a little bit because it's going to help with competition. You're going to be able to better balance those iron levels. But I do recommend that people look at the form of anemia. There's two basic types of anemia. There's iron deficiency anemia and pernicious anemia. Iron deficiency anemia is I don't have enough iron in my diet. I don't have enough iron in my blood. I might be a vegetarian, avoiding foods that have iron because I'm not eating meats. So in that case, certainly try to get foods higher in iron. And you can take an iron supplement. I recommend a carbonyl iron that won't cause constipation. And there are good choices out there. Pernicious anemia is a B vitamin deficiency. You need B vitamins for energy metabolism. You need B vitamins to be able to properly use iron in your body. So if you have pernicious anemia, you got to make sure that you're getting B vitamins, and you can just take a B complex.
Awesome. Thank you, Rick. And by the way, Colette, who is on chemo and taking Daily Detox, was saying that it's actually helping her hemoglobin levels, iron levels to stay, to come up, and just as you said, could possibly happen. So very encouraging. Okay, I'm going to try to tie a few of these together. We have a question about the zeolite Daily Detox Plus going through the brain-blood barrier. But also, could you connect that, also expand your response to people? We have a lot of people, as Anna gave us this wonderful testimony, we have a lot of people with different kinds of cancer at this point, and we're not making any medical claims, as we said earlier. We've already made that disclaimer. But I have someone who has pancreatic cancer right now, is on the zeolite, 100 drops a day. We've got several people, we have someone brain cancer, different things. So if you could just kind of work that together of how, why, and if is apoptosis or apoptosis a good thing to talk about? That's something that I always understood. So great, thank you.
So so it's a lot to go over. I'll start with blood-brain barrier, and the answer with blood-brain barrier is we don't know. Okay, the blood-brain barrier is a really important thing. It stops normal things from the blood getting into the brain. Even white blood cells, which normally stop infection, don't get into the brain. The brain has its own immune system called microglial cells or microglial cells. Can the zeolite can the micronized zeolite get into the brain? And the answer is I don't know. I did propose a study years ago, and this is I don't want to say anything about network marketing distributors. I can only say you're very passionate people. I did propose a rat study to be done, and my contention was if I had normal rats and I had rats that had neurologic defects, like what they call an EAE, I would see if the zeolite could get into the brain of either normal rats or rats with dysfunction, because sometimes people with neurologic dysfunction have a leaky blood-brain barrier. And I got so much pushback because I was quote unquote hurting poor rats. So I couldn't do the study. And I finally decided to abandon that line altogether when someone recommended, one of the distributors recommended that we use prisoners instead of rats. So I said, okay, I'm not going there. I went to the rat study. I will say it probably does cross the blood-brain barrier. There's a lot of reasons I would contest that it does. I can't prove it though. But the other side of the coin is I don't need to, because here's what happens. The zeolite, for the most part, 99.9% of the function of the zeolite is extracellular. It doesn't get into the cells. It works all over the body, and any toxins in circulation, the zeolite's going to capture and pull out of the body. When that happens, it causes something called a concentration gradient, where there's no metals, no toxin circulation. All these toxins now are inside the cells and in the tissue. Because of that concentration gradient, the tissue is going to start releasing the toxins back into the bloodstream to balance that out. It's a chemical principle called Le Chatelier's principle, where everything's trying to balance itself out against the concentration gradient. So when that happens, the zeolite consistently cleans you out. All the stuff is going to be released over time from tissue, including the stuff in the brain. So if you have toxins in the brain, this whole process is going to remove them anyway. It's going to remove slowly and consistently over time. And the best example we have for that is the coal miner study we did. We looked at the coal miners and we tested their blood and urine at day 1, day 4, day 7, and weekly thereafter. And right away, we saw the high affinity metals like mercury. Right away, we saw these huge amounts of mercury coming out of the coal miners. But then we looked, and at week 3, week 4, there was very little mercury. There was lead and arsenic, but very little mercury. Cut to a month later, now we're at week 8 or 9, suddenly we see these mercury levels start spiking again. And what we feel was happening is that we got rid of all the mercury in circulation and we started getting rid of all these other toxins in circulation. But now the tissue is starting to release the mercury. And as the tissue releases mercury, now we start seeing the mercury again as we're pulling it out. And so you can kind of see the waves of these different metals coming out against the concentration of the zeolite, the affinity range of the zeolite. So that's a story of the blood-brain barrier. It doesn't really matter if it gets across the blood-brain barrier. It's still going to take things out. And then you asked about cancer. And again, we can't make any claims of the treatment of cancer. I can tell you there were 2 published studies done with clinoptilolite, the zeolite that we use, that looked at the adjunctive use of the zeolite with cancer patients. And primarily, they found that cancer cells didn't do well with the zeolite, and they surmised it from several different directions. The first thing is what I've already talked about, pH. As pH comes up, cancer can't grow, can't replicate in an alkaline environment. So that's the first thing. The second thing is this concept of apoptosis, which Robin just mentioned. And just so you know, it's Apoptosis. It's spelled apoptosis. The second P is silent. So if you talk to a doctor that says apoptosis, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay, he doesn't know how to pronounce the word. Okay, so ptosis, P-T-O-S-I-S, is basically, apoptosis is programmed cell death. So there's 2 ways for a cell to die. It can either just die and you have a dead corpse of a cell, that's called necrosis, or you have programmed cell death, cell suicide, with this apoptosis. Apoptosis is the cell identifies that there's something wrong. There's something wrong with the cell and it has to die. So what it does is it starts digesting itself. It creates peroxide. It sends out signals to white blood cells to come and eat it, phagocytize it. And so the cool thing about apoptosis is that there's resolution. The cell is gone. With necrosis, you have this dead tissue that then needs to be removed. And that's where you have, like, black moles and things like that. It's because you have dead tissue that needs to be removed. That's necrosis. So there are several genes in our body that cause apoptosis, that are like the watchdogs of the cells, and say if they get activated, you have to kill the cell. And there's a gene, the P51 tumor suppressor gene, that is incredibly sensitive for some reason to the zeolite. And we found that when the zeolite gets into the cell, it can activate the P51 tumor suppressor gene, which causes apoptosis. Now, for cancer to be successful, it's got to trick those genes. It's got to trick those tumor suppressor genes into not activating. So here there's a cancer cell, and it's a lovely little cancer cell, and it's trying to divide, and it's trying to replicate, and it's trying to do whatever. And that P51 pokes up and says, is something wrong with the cell? And the cancer cell is saying, no, everything's fine here. Go back to sleep. There's nothing wrong here. So now imagine that the zeolite gets in the cell. And this is important because remember I said that the zeolite doesn't really get into cells. The zeolite, 99% of the function of the zeolite is extracellular. But cancer cells are incredibly hungry. Cancer cells need a lot of raw material to keep making copies of itself, to make new cells. And so the cancer cells have very leaky membranes. They suck all sorts of things into the cell through a process called endocytosis. So when you have the zeolite that gets near a cancer cell, there's a good chance that the cancer cell is going to suck it up, pull it inside through endocytosis. So now imagine I have the zeolite cage that's full of toxins and heavy metals that probably has a bunch of volatile organic compounds stuck to the surface of the zeolite because that's how it traps volatile organics. And I drag this toxic bomb into a cancer cell. Now what's going to happen? The P51 tumor suppressor gene goes, whoa, something's really wrong here. I need to kill myself. And so that is the theory that the zeolite, delivering the zeolite into the cancer cell will induce apoptosis and has done so in vitro and in vivo in those studies. I will say I love the mechanism. It's very apropos because remember that many of these toxins are carcinogenic or cancer causing. So it's kind of cool that the same toxins that might have caused the cancer are the same things that could in fact be destroying it. Yeah. So that's kind of like that story.
Oh, that is cool. I like that. Okay, several more questions. I'm going to try to get through here. You're doing great, Rik. This is beautiful. Appreciate it. Okay, I have a couple of people asking about diabetes and how Daily Detox, again, without making any medical claims, we don't, but how Daily Detox Plus could affect a person with diabetes. And saying, gentleman is saying that he has a team member who says it gives the Daily Detox Plus gives her a racing heart and high blood sugar, which I just let you respond to that.
Yeah, it should not be possible. And for that particular person, I have to see what they're doing, what medications they're taking, what else they're doing with their daily life. So this whole diabetes discussion goes back to 2008. I gave a lecture in Maui. And for the most part, Robin, I'll tell you, I don't like testimonials. People get up and they give these broad testimonials, and then I have to basically back them off and say, okay, is this possible? Is this somehow related to the product? And what is a potential mechanism of action for this? So this is a true story, 800 people in Maui. This guy gets up on stage and he literally said, I was blind and now I can see. And so the crowd is getting confused. Some people are leaving. I said, no, let's find out what's going on. So this particular guy was a brittle diabetic. He was taking 4 shots of insulin a day, really had uncontrolled diabetes, and he started taking care of himself. He did start eating better. He was exercising, and he started using the zeolite. And he found that he was getting better and better, needing less and less insulin. But he also had the beginning stages of diabetic retinopathy, which is the leading cause of adult blindness in the United States. And he found that when he was controlling his blood sugar and using the zeolite, his retinopathy improved and his eyesight improved and his retinopathy went away, which can happen in early stages of diabetic retinopathy. So did the zeolite give him his sight back? No, but it made his body healthier, which allowed him to reverse that particular condition because it was early enough to reverse that particular condition. So how does that work? So we have a couple of mechanisms that it might help in diabetes, but the most important thing to understand is that what causes the side effects or deficits in diabetes. So people know you have a lot of blood sugar, you have sugar going around the body. Well, the sugar in circulation is not really the problem. It's when it starts to attach to things. So when you have a high amount of sugar in the blood, it starts to settle in. It starts to attach to things. Depending on what it attaches to is the damage it causes. So when sugar attaches to nerves, for example, it's glycosylation of the nerves, that causes diabetic neuropathy. Damages the nerves and causes damage to nerves, which is diabetic neuropathy. When it attaches to the back of the eye, that's diabetic retinopathy, which leads to blindness. If it attaches to the walls of the blood vessel, it can cause claudications, narrowing the blood vessels, which leads to necrosis and amputation of limbs and things like that. So depending on where the sugar attaches is the damage caused by the diabetes. So if you look at an actual glucose molecule, it has what they call a dipole moment. Part of it is positive and part of it is negative. So one of the theories is, and we have seen this basically modeled, is that the zeolite cage, this highly negative zeolite cage, is flying through the blood vessels, and there's some sugar that has a little positive end to it, and it starts getting tugged along with the zeolite. The zeolite starts moving it along, keeping it in circulation. So the zeolite doesn't really like the sugar. It's not attaching to the sugar. It's not grabbing the sugar, but it can actually help, kind of like it's kind of like the train, kind of pulling the sugar around the body, keeping it in circulation, allowing it to be used properly, and not allowing it to be readily deposed, where it can cause all sorts of damage. So that is the main theory of how the zeolite helps in diabetics. Again, it also prevents diabetic ketosis by raising the alkalinity of the body, and diabetic ketosis can cause a lot of the damage of diabetes as well. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, we've had some wonderful testimonies about that. The person that asked that, we can get a hold of her and help with that too. But thank you for the science behind that. We have a lot more questions, Rik, and that brings me to my question for you to think about, please, because this team of yours really would love to have you on our call more often. So if we can talk about that for the future. And I have probably more questions than we can ask today. So I may be passing some of these on to you and get email response from you if that's okay. But I would like to save some of these for next time also. But I think a really good question would be, what do you maybe bringing the call to a close, anything you would like to add, Rik? But also people are wondering from your perspective, how many drops should someone be taking? Maybe if they're healthy or if they have an issue, or what do you feel is a good amount of drops we should take?
Okay, so I don't know if you noticed, I take a lot. I use it all the time. I'm more of a, when I think about it, I take it sort of guy, you know? I will say this, and I've said this before, there's no such thing as an upper dose. For the great majority of people, they can take as much as they want, and they're not going to have any negative side effects. There are some people, and I've actually talked to a few in the last couple of weeks, that are highly toxic. And think about it this way. If you're incredibly toxic, that means you have a lot of metals, a lot of toxins that are sequestered. Your body burden is very high. And when you start taking the zeolite, some of these people, it's almost like their body's thrilled that they're starting to get rid of some of this stuff, and tissues just start releasing the toxins all at once. And that's one of the big issues with other modalities of detoxification. When people take laxatives or diuretics, it moves the toxins around so quickly that they have what they call a toxic storm or a detox syndrome. There's all sorts of different ways that people describe this. But what's happening is all these toxins now are in circulation all over again, and it can make you feel very sick. You get flu-like symptoms, muscle aches, sleeplessness, all sorts of issues. That usually doesn't happen with the zeolite. In 99% of the cases, it's nice and slow and steady detoxification. But in those people that are having those issues, those toxic storms, they have two choices, and this is what I always say. One thing is they can keep taking it, take a high dose, keep cleaning yourself out, and try to get rid of these toxins as quickly as possible. Drink plenty of water and keep detoxing. It's going to be uncomfortable, but you'll get through it. The other way, what most people choose to do, is to greatly reduce their intake. Just a 1 drop or 2 drops at a time, maybe even just a couple of drops in a bottle of water and drink it through the day, just to slow down the process, and over time, increase the dosage as you can handle it. The worst thing you can do is stop taking the daily detox, because what happens now is you've now shuffled all these toxins, they're all in circulation. You say, this product did this to me, and you stop taking it. Well, now all this stuff it's all in circulation. It's all causing havoc. It's wreaking havoc all over your body. So you need to keep taking the product to try and clean that stuff out. All right. And that becomes your choice of how to take it. So what is a good dose? I will say this, the product is passively absorbed. So to think about this, when you have stuff in your digestive tract and you need to get from the digestive tract into the bloodstream, you have 2 ways of absorption. Passive absorption, where it simply will kind of move or diffuse from the intestinal tract into the bloodstream. And you have active absorption, where it attaches to a receptor on the walls of the intestinal tract that pulls it through. So there are some things that are actively absorbed because the body needs it, so it's willing to spend energy to get it, certain nutrients. And then there are things that are passively absorbed, which just kind of diffuse into the bloodstream. The zeolite is passively absorbed. Anything that's passively absorbed can never be absorbed into a concentration gradient. So in other words, once a certain amount of zeolite gets into the bloodstream, no more is going to get across. Does that make sense? You know, because now there's so much there, it's not going to just move across. And I found that on any single dose, right around 15 drops is about as much as going to be absorbed at any single time. So I tell people to get the most bang for your buck, you don't want to take more than 15 drops at a time because it's just not going to be absorbed. Now, it doesn't mean it's wasted because you have lots and lots of toxins in your digestive tract, and it's going to take care of those toxins. But if you want to get the most bang for your buck for systemic detoxification, you don't want to take more than 15 drops at a time. Okay, so what does that mean? So the maximum dose, 15 drops every hour of the day, you could do that certainly. I know Marcy talks about her, real dose, her max dose, which is like 10 drops an hour as long as you're awake. And certainly that's healthy and you can do it. It's going to detox a lot. The recommendation for the average healthy person or average person just trying to detox is I recommend for the first month, 10 drops 3 to 4 times a day. Spread it out, breakfast, lunch, dinner, bedtime, and that's what I call the detox dose. So do that for the first month, and then you can lower it to the maintenance dose, which is exactly what's recommended in the bottle, 10 drops twice a day. Every 6 months, 6 to 7 months, you probably want to repeat the detox dose for exactly the reason I gave before when I talked about the coal miner study. These toxins are going to start leaching out and you're going to get higher and higher amounts. And also you don't know what your exposures is naturally as you go about your day. So every 6 months or so, I would repeat the detox dose to try and clean out circulating toxins again. And then the other question is, and I do this all the time when I give public meetings. Of course, with COVID, we haven't done any big meetings, but when I do a big public meeting, people say, well, Rik, when do I stop taking it? At what point do I stop taking it? And I said, okay, well, I guess at that point, did you stop exposing yourself to toxins and heavy metals? So I say, by show of hands, how many people eat? And then everyone raises their hand. How many people drink? How many people breathe? And then of course I finish it with how many people won't raise their hand no matter what I say. So the fact is, as long as you're eating, drinking, and breathing, you're exposing yourself to toxins, and you should keep taking the product to try and keep that at bay and knock it out. So I hope that answered that particular question, Robin.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Someone asked per pound, please. And I just want to say, it's actually per situation. We've had babies that have gone and got their inoculations, and we had, my sister had one that she's taking care of that he was just crying and crying after that and started giving him drops, 3, 4 or 5 times a day. And then, did that for a few days and he stopped crying right away, by the way. It wasn't very many hours. And so if you want to approach that, it's not by pound, it's probably more by what the situation.
This is important because I have other products that aren't related to milligram per kilogram. And a lot of times when you do drug research, that's exactly what it is. We try to figure out milligram per kilogram, and depending on the weight of the patient, how much drug they can handle. But it really doesn't work like that because it doesn't matter how big or small you are, your circulating toxins are pretty much the same. And when you're going through the blood and the lymph, the circulation is going to be pretty much the same. So we don't have a milligram per kilogram dosage. So that really doesn't matter. And I deal with this too with my neurologic products and my neurologic drugs, because it doesn't matter how big you are, you really have the same amount of nerves, the same amount of nerve junctions, same amount of nerve nuclei. And so it's not microgram per kilogram or milligram per kilogram. It's always the same dose no matter how big or small you are.